For more than a decade, the ocean refused to answer the question that haunted the world. Where did Flight MH370 go? That silence was broken when Dr. Vincent Lyne, a marine physicist long dismissed as a mad dreamer, announced he had built a way to find it. His invention, a deep-sea drone called Pathfinder, used quantum lidar technology said to be 100 times more powerful than sonar. In 2023, Lyne launched it into the Indian Ocean, near a zone the official search had long abandoned. What the drone found stunned the entire control room. Buried beneath miles of darkness, it detected a signal identical to the black box of a Boeing 777. But alongside it appeared something else, a perfect black sphere, smooth, motionless, and radiating a signal unlike anything seen before. That single image changed everything. From that moment, the disappearance of MH370 was no longer just a tragedy. It had become a mystery buried deeper than anyone imagined. Dr. Vincent Lyne was never the kind of scientist who accepted easy answers. A marine physicist from the University of Tasmania, he had spent decades studying how the ocean hides its secrets, how it bends light, absorbs sound, and swallows anything that dares to fall into its depths. When Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished in March 2014, the world moved on after a few years of failed searches. But Lyne didn't. He refused to believe that a Boeing 777 could simply disappear. In his view, the data told a different story. The satellite pings, the radar echoes, and the strange final turn of the aircraft suggested to him that the jet hadn't plunged uncontrollably into the sea. It had descended in a controlled manner, maybe even guided to a specific spot, deep enough to escape detection. While governments debated funding and theories faded from headlines, Lyne began his own investigation. He re-examined every Inmarsat data burst, modeled ocean currents across the southern Indian Ocean, and simulated drift patterns of debris using decades of hydrodynamic research. Each calculation brought him closer to one chilling conclusion: the wreckage must be lying far below any region ever mapped by sonar. If true, the search tools used by official expeditions had been blind from the start. That realization pushed him toward an idea that sounded impossible: a device that could see underwater, not through sound waves, but through light itself. It became his obsession. He called it Pathfinder, a fully autonomous submersible powered by a quantum-enhanced lidar array. Where sonar scatters in darkness, lidar could illuminate details even through miles of pressurized water. Lyne spent years refining the design alone, often in a small workshop near Hobart's coast, testing prototypes in frigid Tasman waters. There was no government grant, no university endorsement, and no media coverage, only a quiet conviction that something still waited to be found. His colleagues called him stubborn, some called him delusional, but for Lyne, the search for MH370 was no longer about fame or funding. It was about closing a wound that the world had left open for too long. No one had asked him to do it. No one had paid him to keep looking. Dr. Vincent Lyne just wanted one thing: the truth. The first clue came not from technology, but from the tide. In early 2016, two small fragments of aircraft debris washed ashore on the coast of Mozambique. They were light, worn by salt and time, yet unmistakably modern, pieces of a Boeing 777. Investigators compared serial numbers and found an eerie match. Both parts belonged to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. For the world, it was a tragic confirmation. For Dr. Vincent Lyne, it was the beginning of a deeper puzzle. The fragments shouldn't have been there. The wind and ocean currents that sweep across the Indian Ocean flow from west to east. Yet these pieces had drifted the opposite way, landing thousands of miles from the predicted debris paths. It didn't add up. Lyne began reanalyzing the official drift models released by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. He noticed how the simulations relied on surface current data collected from buoys and satellites, tools that only skimmed the upper layers of the sea. Beneath those layers, however, the Indian Ocean hides powerful subsurface streams, invisible to radar and unpredictable even to advanced mapping systems. If those undercurrents were stronger than expected, they could carry debris from far deeper regions. That was when Lyne turned his attention to an overlooked section of the ocean floor, the Gulvink Fracture Zone. Stretching across the southern Indian Ocean, this geological scar runs miles deep and has never been fully scanned by sonar. Most search missions avoided it because the terrain was too steep, the pressure too immense, and the signal return too faint for reliable imaging. But to Lyne, those were exactly the reasons it deserved attention. He believed the aircraft might have glided deliberately toward that region, a controlled descent ending in silence, far below any search grid ever mapped. The debris in Mozambique, he thought, wasn't random. It was a message carried by the sea, pointing back to where the plane had settled. Lyne began plotting coordinates, calculating distances, and running computer models to trace a reverse drift. Every variable, wind direction, temperature, salinity, led to the same result, the Gulvink Fracture Zone. The data didn't just suggest depth, it hinted at precision. Someone or something had guided the jet to a place the world could never reach with conventional tools. As he stared at the map glowing on his monitor, one thought echoed in his mind. If the plane had landed there, it wasn't just lost. It was resting in a graveyard humanity had never seen. To reach the place where sonar had failed, Dr. Vincent Lyne needed a new kind of vision, something that could pierce through darkness, pressure, and time itself. That vision became Pathfinder, a deep-sea drone built not on sound, but on light. Lyne and a small team of engineers began developing what they called Quantum Lidar, or LAR for short, a technology capable of scanning the ocean floor in ways no sonar ever could. Instead of sending acoustic pulses, Pathfinder emitted bursts of concentrated green light, designed to penetrate seawater nearly 3 miles deep. To most scientists, that seemed impossible. Light, after all, scatters and weakens quickly in the ocean. But Lyne's system was different. By synchronizing the laser pulses through a quantum algorithm that corrected for refraction in real time, Pathfinder could maintain focus even under crushing pressure. Every return beam carried a depth reading precise down to a single centimeter. Over time, those readings formed a living 3D map of the seabed, a digital landscape revealing metallic objects buried for decades beneath layers of sediment. With each test, Pathfinder proved that the impossible could be measured. In its first field trial off Tasmania's coast, the drone identified a rusted shipwreck at 4,600 feet, an image so clear it captured the curvature of the hull and the serial markings on its frame. The data stunned even its skeptics. For Lyne, that was only the beginning. If a small test drone could visualize an old wreck in near-perfect detail, then a full-scale version could find a plane the size of a Boeing 777. More importantly, it could do so in places no human or sonar probe had ever reached. To him, MH370 wasn't destroyed on impact. It was intact, waiting in the depths like a ghost trapped in time. The challenge was not to hear it, but to see it. Pathfinder was built for that purpose alone. an autonomous explorer equipped with AI navigation, titanium plating, and a self-correcting light array designed to survive where pressure could crush steel. Every component, every circuit was built by hand or salvaged from discontinued research projects. Funding was scarce, but conviction was limitless. Lyne knew that if the aircraft truly lay within the Gullwink fracture zone, Pathfinder would be the only machine capable of reaching it. Years of work led to one silent night in late 2023 when the first full-scale Pathfinder stood ready on a private dock in Western Australia. No press, no announcements, just the hum of its power core beneath the stars. And then, without a word, the drone slipped beneath the waves, beginning its mission in absolute silence. In December 2023, a ship with no flag and no nation quietly departed the port of Fremantle, Australia. Its hull carried no markings, its manifest listed no destination. To anyone watching from the docks, it looked like a routine research vessel. But on board, behind sealed containers and encrypted systems, a secret mission was about to begin. Only a handful of scientists were aboard, handpicked by Dr. Vincent Lyne himself. They called the operation the Phantom Signal. At its core was a single machine, Pathfinder, the deep-sea drone that had taken nearly a decade to build. Every component had been tested, recalibrated, and tested again. Yet this time, it wasn't an experiment, it was a search. As the ship drifted beyond the continental shelf, the crew prepared Pathfinder for descent. The air was calm, but the mood was tense. At a depth target of 15,000 feet, the ocean's pressure would be enough to crush reinforced steel like paper. Still, the drone's titanium frame and quantum-stabilized optics were built for this moment. The launch sequence began at dawn. The drone slipped beneath the surface, its green lidar beams cutting into the black water like distant lightning. The control monitors flickered with streams of data, temperature, salinity, and seismic patterns from the ocean floor. Hours passed in silence. Then came the sound. Pathfinder's sensors began to record low-frequency rumbles, faint echoes from tectonic shifts, the distant cries of whales, the constant pulse of the Earth itself. The Indian Ocean is rarely still, and the deeper the drone went, the louder its heartbeat became. Each layer of data was carefully logged, each echo analyzed for artificial interference. But for a long time, there was nothing unusual, only the cold rhythm of the sea. Lyne stood behind the console, eyes fixed on the sonar overlay. Even though Pathfinder was not using sonar in the traditional sense, it was the background noise, the static between frequencies, that fascinated him. He believed that if the plane's black box was still transmitting, it wouldn't be through sound alone, but through residual electromagnetic resonance trapped in the surrounding metal. Pathfinder's LiDAR system, tuned to capture even the slightest energy distortion, would be able to detect it. And then, something shifted. Among the natural frequencies, a new pattern emerged. Faint, rhythmic, almost biological, but too precise to be natural. The data technicians froze. It wasn't seismic. It wasn't a whale song. It was a pulse, steady and deliberate, buried beneath 15,000 feet of crushing silence. In the middle of the ocean, surrounded by darkness and pressure, Pathfinder had heard something it was never supposed to hear. A heartbeat that did not belong to any living thing. For 3 days, Pathfinder swept the darkness in perfect silence. Its quantum lidar pulsed every few seconds, sending beams of green light through nearly 3 miles of cold water, then gathering them back as echoes of shape and shadow. Most of what returned was nothing. Sediment, rock, the occasional glint of a metallic mineral. But after 72 hours, a signal appeared on the feed. At first it was faint, a single tone buried in the static of the abyss. Then, unmistakably, it aligned with a known frequency, 37.5 kHz, the standard transmission of a Boeing 777 black box. The command room froze. Every engineer knew the same fact. The battery powering that transmitter was designed to last only 30 days. Flight MH370 had vanished almost 10 years earlier. There was no logical way a ping could still be active, yet the reading was clear, steady, and artificial. Dr. Lyne ordered the drone to adjust its course toward the coordinates of the source. The path was steep and treacherous, descending through the narrow ridges of the Gulvink fracture zone. The deeper Pathfinder went, the more defined the signal became, pulsing like a metronome beneath the static roar of the ocean floor. Then, the first image appeared. Against a field of silt and black rock, the LIDAR map formed the outline of a wing, clean, intact, and unmistakably human-made. The curvature matched the dimensions of a Boeing 777's right wing panel, preserved under layers of marine growth but still structurally sound. As Pathfinder moved closer, the shape expanded across the monitor. Fuselage, tail section, engines. It was all there. The entire aircraft resting upright on the seabed, its nose slightly tilted downward as if frozen mid-descent. The 3D reconstruction revealed something else, a long drag mark carved into the sediment, stretching hundreds of feet behind the wreck. It wasn't the pattern of a crash, it was the trail of a landing. The flaps were down, the landing gear partially deployed, and the fuselage showed no signs of explosive decompression. The plane hadn't shattered. It had glided. Inside the ship's control room, silence replaced disbelief. The data defied every official report, every reconstruction ever published. Lyne stared at the feed, realizing what the evidence implied. If the aircraft had landed intentionally, then someone had guided it. Someone had known exactly where to go, straight into one of the deepest, least accessible scars on Earth. And as the team studied the last frames of the scan, one question cut through the static like a knife. If someone had controlled that descent, were they running from something or carrying something the world was never meant to find? The green beam of Pathfinder's LIDAR swept slowly across the darkness, painting the ocean floor in spectral light. Out of the black void, the image of the aircraft emerged, not as wreckage, but as something eerily preserved. The fuselage stood almost intact, its metallic skin dulled by years of pressure and silt. When the scan reached the passenger cabin, the details came alive in haunting clarity. Seats were bent but still anchored to the floor. Safety belts were clasped tight around empty cushions as if passengers had never left. Loose panels drifted in slow motion through the thin haze of sediment, every movement captured in glowing outlines. Lyne and his team stared at the live feed in silence. There were no shattered wings, no signs of explosion, no scattered debris field typical of a high-speed crash. Instead, the wreck looked deliberate, positioned, not destroyed. The LIDAR pulses revealed the smallest details: an emergency exit door wedged open, an oxygen mask tangled in the aisle, the pilot's seat visible through the shattered glass of the cockpit. It was like a time capsule sealed 16,000 feet beneath the surface. The stillness was unnatural. Even the ocean currents, normally fierce at such depths, seemed to fade here. Readings showed almost no movement of surrounding water, a stagnant calm that had preserved the site far beyond what any marine scientist thought possible. At that depth, most metal structures collapse or corrode within years, but this one stood defiant, its form barely touched. Lyne's geophysicists suggested that the weak undercurrents and fine mineral composition of the sediment created a vacuum-like layer, slowing decay and trapping every object in place. To them, this preservation was the final proof. The aircraft had landed in a controlled descent, its engines likely cut before impact. As Pathfinder continued scanning, the data stream grew dense, forming a full 3D reconstruction of the site. The plane's shadow stretched across a small ridge, and just beyond it, the system picked up something else, a faint source of energy, pulsing irregularly in the distance. At first, the technicians assumed it was interference or a reflection from the drone's own sensors, but the signal persisted, strong and deliberate, echoing through the darkness in measured intervals. Lyne adjusted the coordinates and commanded Pathfinder to move closer. The green light faded, replaced by intermittent flashes as the drone entered a narrow trench. There, half buried in silt, the LiDAR mapped an object unlike any geological formation ever recorded. Smooth, spherical, and radiating energy. In that still, silent graveyard, surrounded by the frozen remains of Flight MH370, Pathfinder's final scan captured something no one could explain. What it saw next was no longer metal and no longer human. Pathfinder's LiDAR beam swept across the trench, and then the feed froze. At the center of the frame, resting motionless in the silt, was a sphere, perfect in shape, flawless in symmetry. It measured roughly 10 feet across, its surface matte black, absorbing every trace of light that touched it. No reflection, no shadow. To the drone's sensors, it appeared less like an object and more like an absence, a hole in the very light it used to see. Lyne ordered a slow 360-degree scan. As the drone circled, faint geometric patterns began to appear along the surface, spirals, concentric lines, and repeating symbols that pulsed faintly in the residual energy field. They weren't letters or numbers, at least not in any known human language. Every attempt to translate or match them to ancient scripts failed. The surface composition only deepened the mystery. It wasn't metal, rock, or polymer. It reflected no magnetic signature, emitted no heat, yet appeared to drain energy from the surrounding water. Within minutes, the drone sensors registered a steady drop in power, as if something was feeding on its systems. The team's preliminary analysis suggested something even stranger. Carbon dating from particle scatter implied the object had been there for centuries, buried long before any modern vessel or aircraft had ever crossed that part of the Indian Ocean. The sphere had outlasted storms, quakes, and tectonic drift, lying dormant until now. For Lyne, that realization split the room into debate. The first theory was extraterrestrial. Some believed the sphere could be a long-dormant probe, an ancient device sent to monitor or record Earth's oceans, reactivated by the vibrations of the descending aircraft. The second theory turned inward, proposing it as a relic of a forgotten civilization, a form of pre-human technology powered by principles we no longer understand. The third, whispered in private between engineers, was more grounded yet no less alarming, that the sphere was man-made, an ultra-classified military artifact placed here deliberately, perhaps during the Cold War, hidden beneath miles of pressure where no satellite could ever see it. Each idea seemed impossible, yet none could be ruled out. The sphere's existence broke every rule of physics and history that the team knew. Lyne sat in silence, eyes fixed on the monitor, as Pathfinder's battery continued to drain faster than any test had predicted. Then, in the data stream, a chilling correlation appeared. The 37.5 kHz pulse, the black box signal, was now emanating from the sphere itself. Somehow, after nearly a decade of silence, something down there had awakened. And whatever it was, it might have been the very thing that brought the signal of Flight MH370 back to life. As Pathfinder extended its robotic arm toward the black sphere, the control room went silent. The claw drifted forward slowly, light shimmering across the matte surface that swallowed every reflection. Then, without warning, every monitor flickered. 1 second, the drone sensors were transmitting normally. The next, they were gone. The signal cut off mid-frame. The LiDAR feed froze on the image of the sphere's edge, and then blacked out completely. The entire system shut down. Power, navigation, telemetry, everything. The drone was dead. For 48 agonizing minutes, there was nothing but static. The crew on the surface tried to re-establish connection, rebooting every circuit and rerouting power through secondary channels. Nothing worked. The drone, worth millions in equipment and years of effort, had vanished into digital silence beneath 15,000 feet of water. Then, just as suddenly, the signal came back. Pathfinder was still intact, but its systems were crippled. The main camera was burned out. Half the sensors had failed, and the data logs, which had been recording continuously, were wiped clean. Only fragments remained: incomplete 3D scans of the fuselage, partial frequency readings from the sphere, and a handful of corrupted video frames. In those frames, the outlines of the Boeing 777 and the black orb were still visible, fused together in the final moments before the blackout. When the drone surfaced hours later, its hull showed no external damage, but inside, the memory drives were partially melted, as if exposed to a powerful electromagnetic field. Lyne's engineers spent days trying to salvage what was left, piecing together fragments of the mission's final minutes. The recovered data was enough to confirm two things beyond doubt. Flight MH370 was indeed found, and beside it sat an object unlike anything known to science. Before the data could be reviewed, something changed. During Pathfinder's recovery, several drives failed, and most of the footage was lost. Only fragments remained: the LiDAR scans of Flight MH370 and a single burst of energy from the black sphere before the signal vanished. Technical logs showed no malfunction, only silence, as if the drone had been shut down by something it couldn't detect. The remaining data revealed one anomaly. The sphere's final pulse carried a pattern nearly identical to deep space background signals, not random, but structured. The findings were never made public. Pathfinder was stored for future testing, and the expedition quietly disappeared from reports. In the end, two things were certain. The wreck of MH370 was real, and beside it lay something that shouldn't exist. Whether it was a failure, a reaction, or a message remains unanswered, buried deep beneath 16,000 feet of silence. Dr. Vincent Lyne proved one undeniable truth. Sonar has limits, but human curiosity does not. In his search for a lost plane, he uncovered something far greater than wreckage. The black sphere beneath the Indian Ocean remains an unanswered question, suspended between science and myth. Was it an alien probe? A relic of an ancient technology? Or a hidden weapon buried by a nation that never wanted it found? And if Flight MH370 truly landed under control, then who was guiding it, and why here, to the one place light could barely reach? Theories multiply, but evidence fades with each passing day. Some believe the sphere reactivated the plane's black box, others think it was never asleep at all. Maybe it was sending a message, or perhaps it was calling something, or someone, back. Whatever the truth, it lies sealed in darkness, beyond the reach of satellites and reason. Subscribe to MindGap for more stories the world isn't ready to face, because sometimes what we search for in the dark is already staring back at us.